I've had random episodes of sleepwalking for as long as I can remember, and it started when I was a kid. My parents would find me wandering around the house in the middle of the night, and a few times I had even gotten outside to the backyard. My dad put an extra lock on our back slider, and I tried a medication once when I was in middle school, but nothing really stopped it. These episodes aren't all the time, maybe only once or twice a year, but they've never completely gone away, and the weirdest part about them is every single time they happen, I have the same dream. I don't even know if I'd call it a dream because it's not like a normal dream. It's always just me in a completely empty space with very little light, talking to someone or something that I can't see. I don't know what this thing looks like because I never actually see it, I just know it's there. The conversations are always strange too. I don't speak with my mouth, I can just hear what it's saying to me in my mind, then I'll reply in the same way. But the things I'm told are a bit out there. It's like I'm talking to someone from the future or someone who knows far more than we do. I'll ask questions that are sometimes random and sometimes deep, like what is time or what happens after we die. Then it will answer me with incredibly profound knowledge and information, but as soon as I wake up, most of it fades. I'll always remember having the conversation, but only fragments of what was actually said will stay in my memory. It's usually just enough to know it happened again, but nothing more. I hadn't had an episode in over a year when this happened, but here's the story. I live in a somewhat rural neighborhood in northern Arizona, right outside of Flagstaff. I had recently gotten a couple of those battery-powered Ring cameras as a birthday present from my oldest daughter and ended up installing one on the underside of my front porch roof and the other one above my garage door looking out at the driveway. I had really just wanted them for security, but also thought it was fun to see wildlife when I'd catch it too. One night, only a few weeks after installing the cameras, I went to bed and had the dream again. It was the same as it always is, where I had the conversation with whoever or whatever I talked to with no memory of anything else happening. Then I woke up. Something different happened this time though, because I saw the little notification light on my phone blinking. I rolled over, grabbed my phone, and the first thing I saw was a notification from the Ring app. I opened it and it said that motion was detected at 3:12 a.m. and there's a still picture from the video of some guy standing in my front yard. I hadn't heard the little chime go off while I was sleeping, which is odd because I usually keep my volume up pretty high just in case, and I always wake up if I get any kind of notification. Then I clicked on the video and watched, and I was nervous about seeing who was in my yard and what they were doing. To my complete shock, I realized it was me standing there in the yard. I had walked out the front door, barefoot and in my pajamas, and completely silent. I watched myself walk down my 2 front porch steps and onto the lawn. Then I slowly lifted my head back to look literally straight up in the sky, and then I just stood there with my mouth open. It was a really disturbing thing to watch yourself doing. I kept watching, but because it's the battery-powered Ring camera, it only recorded for 60 seconds before it stopped. That's how those ones work, and I think the 60-second thing was a default setting, but they shut off when there's no more motion after 1 minute. Then I saw a second video. It said motion detected again at 3:32 a.m. I watched that video and saw myself walking back up the steps and into my house. I took the same slow steps and had my eyes wide open. As soon as I got back in the house, I shut the door and that was it. I laid there staring at my phone and trying to remember anything at all about getting out of bed or going outside, but I had nothing. It was hard for me to believe that I had stood in my front yard completely still, staring at the sky for 20 minutes, and I had no memory of it at all. I had to watch the videos a second time and it seriously terrified me, way more than any of my other sleepwalking episodes, because before I had only been worried about hurting myself, but this was downright creepy. I had always assumed that I just wandered around not really doing anything, but seeing myself standing like that, totally motionless in the dark and staring straight up at the sky was extremely disturbing. And on top of that, it not only looked intentional, but it also felt intentional when I watched myself doing it. I spent that morning trying to reason my way out of what happened, wondering if maybe I had just stood there because I was still dreaming, and that's just what my body did naturally. Or maybe it was because I was having a conversation in my dream which made me stand like that, almost like I was listening. Truthfully, I have no idea what happened that night, but now I wonder if I do that every time I sleepwalk and have that dream. My cameras are still up, and so far, I haven't had another episode. I never want to see myself doing that again, but at the same time, part of me wants to know what's going on. I don't want to sound weird here, but I can't help thinking there might be a connection between me staring at the sky like a zombie and the strange dream conversations I'm having with some kind of being or entity. I'm starting to question if they have ever really been dreams, or if it's all been something else this entire time. I go on trail runs a few times a week, always on the same handful of trails not far from my house. Running is a huge part of my life because it keeps me mentally sane, it keeps me in shape, and I genuinely enjoy the solitude of being out in the desert. I live in Utah, and about 10 miles away from my house is a really nice network of trails that wind through the hills and up along a couple of ridges. I've been running out there for years, and I know the trails like the back of my hand. One afternoon, I headed out for what was going to be a quick, easy run. It was one of my regular loops, which is a 6-mile route that goes up onto a ridge, then drops back down and comes back to the parking area. I remember that day being a perfect, cooler afternoon, and I started my run heading uphill toward the ridge. Everything was totally normal until I got to the ridge. I was moving at a good pace, just focused on the music I was listening to. Then out of the corner of my eye, I caught something that looked like light reflecting off of shiny metal. It was coming from just above the hill across from me. I looked at it for a second and thought it was a helicopter, which wouldn't be unusual at all. But the more I looked at it, the more something about it seemed off. I got to a spot on the trail that had a very open view and stopped running for a second to watch this thing because it was moving in such a weird way. From that open part of the trail, it also looked like it was heading toward my direction. I couldn't hear anything that might have told me what it was either, like rotor blades from a helicopter or a small plane engine. I watched it move down the side of the hill across from me, still getting closer to the hill I was on, and really started to wonder what could move the way it did. It wasn't floating or drifting like a balloon, and it wasn't falling either. It was coming down and toward where I was in a fully controlled way. I was almost sure it wasn't someone's drone because I would have heard something at such a short distance, but it was completely silent. Then it finally reached the hill I was on, and it was about the same elevation as the trail just ahead of where I was standing, then just disappeared. I knew it hadn't flown away because I was staring at it the entire time, so I started to think that whatever it was had either fallen, landed, or crashed just a few hundred yards ahead of me. I remember thinking, if it was a drone and it had come back down to whoever was flying it, then they were most likely just a few minutes down the trail, but I was almost sure it wasn't a drone because it was dead silent. I stood there for a few seconds, just kind of waiting to see if anything else happened. Then, out of nowhere, there was a huge flash of light that horribly startled me. I really want to stress that point. It was so bright that it gave me that feeling of my ears ringing immediately after it happened, and it came from exactly where this object had come down. The flash only lasted a fraction of a second, like a giant camera flash, but it was shockingly bright. I would almost say it was a lightning level of brightness, but without the thunder. That was enough for me. My heart was pounding now, and I had this overwhelming feeling that something was going on ahead of me on the trail and that I shouldn't be there alone. I turned around and took off running in the opposite direction, back toward my car. I had no idea what had caused the flash or what was going on. I just wanted to get out of there. By the time I got to my car, I was out of breath and sweating more from nerves than the actual run. When I got in the car, I locked the doors and sat there for a second to look back up at the ridge one more time, but I didn't see anything. While I was driving home, I kept telling myself it was probably nothing and that it had to be someone or a group of people up there doing something, but I had this weird gut feeling about it. When I got home, I told my husband what had happened, and he assured me that it had to be something normal. Talking to him calmed me down a little, and I tried to shift back into my normal weeknight routine. As I was just starting to make dinner, I pulled out my phone to check my run stats on my fitness app. I do this all the time, and it's just a habit because I like to track my mileage for the week. Since I hadn't finished my usual 6-mile loop, I expected to see that I had only done 3 or 4 miles, but when I saw the mileage, my jaw just about hit the floor. My fitness app had tracked me running just over 50 miles. Obviously, my first thought was that it had to be some kind of glitch, so I closed the app and reopened it, but it still showed the same thing. 50 miles logged with a completely scrambled route map that showed me going farther than I had on the trail, then all over the place in this one area, and then way over to the other hill and back. It made absolutely no sense. I showed my husband and he was just as confused, but didn't really think anything of it. He was sure the mileage had to be some kind of GPS error or something weird with the app. That made sense, but why would it happen then? Out of all the runs I do on a regular basis, why would the app screw up on that one? It seemed too weird to me that the one and only time it glitched and freaked out was the time I had such a crazy experience on the trail. I tried really hard to brush it off and forget about it, but it nagged at me for days and then weeks. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened on the trail, and I had this deep feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. I also kept looking back at my mileage and that route map showing me running all over the place. If it was a glitch, the app never fixed itself because I can still scroll back to that date and see the 50 miles. I still use the same app and have the same phone, and it has never once glitched or shown anything weird since that day. It hasn't stopped me from running at all, but I did change where I run when I'm alone. On weeknights, I've been doing long loops around our neighborhood instead of trail runs. I still love being out in the desert, but that experience scared me, and I don't feel comfortable going on those trails solo anymore. I usually only do them when my husband can run with me or if a friend wants to go. I'm still open to any logical answer about what could have happened out there, but I haven't found one yet. Sometimes I go down rabbit holes online when I search for stories that are similar to mine, and I really don't like some of the things I've read. They always seem to lean toward one general explanation, and it's one that always starts with strange sightings or lost time. I don't think I'm mentally ready to accept an explanation like that. This was in mid-July during the summer of last year. My family and I had planned a camping trip with my childhood best friend and his family at Cape Disappointment in Washington State. We had been doing trips like this for years because our parents were friends and we had all grown up together, so it was kind of a tradition. If you've never been to Cape Disappointment, it has that classic Pacific Northwest, misty green atmospheric vibe, especially at night, and our first night was no exception. Around 10 p.m., we were all sitting around the campfire and noticed that the mist was kind of hanging at the treetops, suspended above us in a strange intermittent layer. It wasn't too dense and probably hovering about 50 to 75 feet overhead. I remember this pretty clearly because as the mist moved, it would roll in just at the tips of the trees, sometimes clearing up enough to reveal the very tops of them before obscuring them again. That kind of eerie shifting fog is pretty common in the Pacific Northwest, but that night it added to the whole experience in a way that I love. I was having a great night just sitting there with everyone and watching it. We were all talking and roasting marshmallows like anyone does on a camping trip, and I was leaning back in my chair, looking up at the sky every so often. I remember leaning back to look up again, and that's when I noticed something move into my line of sight from the left, just above the trees where there was a small clearing that had opened up. It was a small, glowing orange ball of light that was slowly moving into view. Right away, I thought maybe it was a plane, but as I kept watching, I realized there were no blinking lights on any part of it. It was just this steady, soft orange glow. It seemed to flicker a little bit, but I couldn't tell if that was actually happening or if it was the mist moving and making it look like that and obscuring it in patches. It was completely silent, and that made my brain start trying to rationalize what I was seeing. I remember blurting out to the group, "What in the world is that?" or something along those lines, and immediately everyone lifted their heads up to look at it. There was a brief moment where everyone was just staring, and then the whole group started talking at once. Some people were excited and some sounded confused, but every single one of us agreed that whatever it was weird. We all stared as it continued moving slowly across the sky, gliding just above this layer of mist. If I had to estimate, I'd say it only ever got to about 100 feet above us at the highest. It took about 10 seconds for it to cross through the clearing, but that felt like an eternity while we were watching it. Then, as quickly as it had shown up, it was gone behind the trees and past where we could see it. The strangest thing about it, in my opinion, was how silent it was. It wasn't that high above us and it had no sound. I've heard about weird, unidentified lights over the northern Oregon and southern Washington coasts, and we actually had a few pilots report them just recently, and that story made it onto the local news, but I never thought I would personally see anything like it. After it went behind the tree line, we all sat there for a few minutes, talking about it and sort of processing the whole thing. The conversation was obviously filled with questions about what it could have been. Someone suggested a drone, of course, but none of us believed we wouldn't have heard it at such a low altitude. Drones are loud, and we had dozens of ears between us that didn't hear a thing. After a while, it seemed like most people just kind of lost interest and our night moved on. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. It stuck with me in a way that I can't quite explain. I kept picturing it in my head and thinking of all the different possibilities of what could have been up there, but I never came up with an answer that satisfied me. Not even that long after it happened, maybe a few months, I brought it up again when we were all together for the holidays. I figured since we had all seen it, someone else would remember it as clearly as I did, but oddly enough, most of them had all but forgotten about it. I got some vague acknowledgments like, oh yeah, that was weird, but that was it. It was like it had just faded from their memory or they didn't care, while for me, it was something that I had never been able to forget. I still don't know what we saw out there. Maybe it was some kind of military craft or maybe something else entirely. Whatever it was, it made a huge impression on me. Cape Disappointment has always been a special place for me too, but now it's special on a whole other level. I for sure spend more time looking up at the sky than I used to, and I hope that someday I might be able to see something like it again. Even if I never see anything again, I feel pretty lucky to have caught such a short glimpse of what was in the sky that night.